Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, is the spiritual successor to the infamous CD-I Zelda duology. Its mission statement is to be like those games, but good. To cut straight to the point, I think it failed spectacularly in that endeavor. For full context, I played the two Zelda CD-I games on the same day as Arzette. Specifically, I played their remastered PC ports using the original CD-I settings. Fundamentally, the CD-I Zelda games are 2D platformer Metroidvanias, where you hop between locations on a somewhat sizable map, chatting up NPCs and nabbing power-ups to explore new areas. Lots of backtracking included, of course. It's a simple gameplay loop which is made far more entertaining by the surreal animated cutscenes, vibrant soundtrack, and gorgeous scenery. Most importantly, something interesting is always happening in the CD-I Zelda games. They don't waste your time. The levels are quite compact and dense. Their overall design is also remarkably smart, naturally drawing the player's mind and eye to places and people of interest, while also providing new locations to explore at a steady pace. Things only fall apart in the actual game mechanics. There are loads of unfair platforming deaths, and the combat is largely trivial button mashing. But it's ultimately all in service to the greater adventure, so I found that pretty excusable. Where Arzette stumbles chiefly is failing to embrace or improve any of the CD-I game's qualities. The combat here is just as meaningless, with enemies you can easily tank through even on the final level, and practically no challenge from start to finish. The game straight up gives you a shield which makes you immune to all projectiles, and you can use it infinitely. It doesn't cost anything, you can just stand there while everything bounces off of you. Absolutely baffling game design. At least in Faces of Evil, some of the bosses were obstacles. No such luck in Arzette. But alright, the fighting is bad, so what? How's the exploration? Well, to be fair, Arzette does some things really well there. There are a few supremely clever shortcuts to find, some devious secrets, and that's actually all I wrote in my notes for positives. So yeah, those are the highlights, but on the flip side, there's a lot here which could have been done better. Most noticeably, there's way too much empty space. In the CD-I Zelda games, there was almost always something interesting on screen, to interact with, to move toward, to experience. But in Arzette, I'll sometimes be walking for several seconds without an eye-catching vista or enemy in sight. And that may sound extremely minor, but again, it's not an issue the CD-I games had. Arzette also really flubs the Metroidvania elements. Instead of blocking off areas of the world naturally, you'll regularly encounter these massive colored barriers. These things simply scream, "This is a video game. These are video game obstacles. Please use the corresponding video game mechanic to dispel these obstacles." This is in stark contrast to the CD-I Zelda titles, where a serious effort was made to keep everything organic. At no point in Faces of Evil or Wand of Gamelon did I see anything as obtrusively fourth wall breaking as these towers of vibrant squares. The CD-I games also made me think about resource management, and in Arzette, I always had more than enough of everything I needed. It's unreal just how many things Arzette does worse. Even its pacing is worse than its inspirations, in a really bonkers way. There are plot revelations which come too early to be impactful, levels which drag on far too long, and the cutscenes? Man, the cutscenes. I do want to at least applaud the game for trying to capture the same strange style as the CD-I titles, but this is a pretty poor homage. The animation in Arzette is less fluid than the CD-I games, less dynamic than the CD-I games, less baffling than the CD-I games, and somehow way more verbose. The CD-I Zelda cutscenes were funny because they weren't trying to be funny. They were trying their best, and due to budget constraints, overambition, and zealous theater acting, they turned out incredibly bizarre. The cutscenes in Arzette, by comparison, are trying too hard to be bad. It feels like the game is constantly going, wink wink, nudge nudge, hey, do you recognize this? It's like the CD-I games. And yeah, I do recognize this. I was just playing those games. They understood something which Arzette doesn't. Brevity is the key to hilarity. Overall, it's really hard to recommend Arzette. If you remove it from its inspiration, it's a completely middle-of-the-road Metroidvania with simple combat, rote exploration mechanics, meme-heavy storytelling, and no identity of its own. But even if you compare it to the Zelda CD-I games, it's less interesting in every way. It's less interesting to look at, less interesting to play, less interesting to think about. Or, to put this all in a more suitably sensational fashion, I will be playing the Faces of Evil and Wand of Gamelon again, several times. They're extremely fascinating in their unique approach to storytelling, and they have an impenetrable, otherworldly atmosphere. In comparison, I will never touch Arzette again.